How do you feel when you walk alone at night? Are you overly cautious? Do you walk in fear, looking back every few seconds thinking that something will happen to you at any moment? Or are you one of those people who feel safe and think that dangerous things only happen to a few people who make the news? My name is Jake, and I used to be one of those people. I mean, I'm a man, I'm an adult, and I'm over 6 feet tall. I'm the kind of guy you wouldn't want to pick a fight with. But that night, none of that mattered. That night, I realized that no matter who you are, if you're looking for misfortune, it'll find you. I used to work at night at a boring office job that is not even worth mentioning. When it was time to go home, I had to rush to the station to catch the last train. If I didn't catch it, I had to walk several blocks in the dark. To be honest, I chose this schedule because I was paid for night hours. I never thought I would be in danger just walking at night. At worst, I'd run. And that's exactly what happened the night it all happened. It was a Tuesday night. This was known to be the dullest and least busy day of the week, but this Tuesday was an exception. My department was the only one that had received extra work, and to make it worse, I was the one who had to make sure everything was in order and close the office. When I left, the few remaining colleagues and I went our separate ways. Everyone had a car except me, but since we lived so far away from each other, no one could give me a ride. I knew I would surely not make the train, but I still thought I might get lucky, so I hurried and ran. When I arrived at the station, I noticed that the ticket seller was not there, which didn't surprise me. Almost nobody pays for a train ticket, and the entrances are open at this hour. Agitated, I checked the electronic signs to see when the train would arrive, but as usual, they weren't working either. I could only wait on the platform and see if the train would show up in the next few minutes. I sat low, illuminated by the dim moonlight, waiting for the train. I didn't think it would arrive. Normally, a few people would have already come to wait for it with me. I looked across the station, just to confirm that no one was coming. But to my surprise, I saw a silhouette in the distance. Another person was coming. I remember thinking that maybe the train was just delayed, but it was coming. But with each step the other person took, I began to notice something strange. Admittedly, I couldn't see far away without my glasses, but there was something about the silhouette that didn't fit. What? When I could see what was ahead of me, I swear my blood froze. That wasn't a man like me coming back from work. He was a man with a sheet covering half of his body. The sheets were dirty, and his pants looked like they were torn. Was he homeless? As I analyzed him, I noticed something else, and maybe this was what I must have seen from the beginning. Although it was only about 2 meters away, the man was not walking in the direction of the end of the train station. He was walking in the direction of me. At that moment, I thought for sure he was paranoid, that this could not be more than a coincidence. But I didn't want to take any risks. I grabbed my backpack from the seat and headed towards the other exit of the train. Even if it took longer, I was determined to go by bus. Once I got off the train station, I walked quickly in the direction of the park, since the bus stop was only a block away. I walked as fast as I could, but without running, because if that man was behind me, he would know I was running away from him. I turned around praying I wouldn't find him, praying he was just a crazy homeless man waiting for the train. But to my terror, that wasn't the case. Not only was he still behind me, but the man with the sheet over his head had closed the gap. As soon as my gaze fell on him, the man changed his posture and started running towards me. He was slow, but very menacing. Each step he took felt firmer than the last, full of determination and heading towards me. There was no point in pretending I wasn't terrified. I had to run too. I ran as fast as I could towards the bus station. It was my lucky day. The bus usually took a long time, but this time it was coming. I made one last dash and daringly crossed the street until I reached the bus stop. The bus almost ran me over, but it had slowed down and the doors had opened.
Hey, are you crazy? I almost ran over you with the bus!
There's a man chasing me.
Yeah, whatever. Pay the ticket.
I reached into my pocket for my wallet, but it was gone. I checked all my pockets and my backpack. It was gone. Sir, I can't find my wallet. It's an emergency. Could I pass without paying?
Oh, so that's how it goes, is it? Get off my bus now!
Sir, you don't understand. There's
no one out there. Either you're insane or you're doing all this to get out of paying the fare. Whatever it is, get off my bus, now!
I looked around and got off. Normally, I wouldn't have done that, especially in a situation like this, but the man in the sheet didn't seem to be around, and I recognized in this man's eyes that he was furious. As soon as the bus left, I was alone once again, or at least I thought so, because from the street, behind where the bus was, he came out once again, that terrifying man with the sheet on his head. Paralyzed with fear and unable to escape, the man stood next to me, walking slowly towards me. I stood against the wall, and when he came face to face with me, he stretched out his hand, trying to give me something.
Hey, this is your wallet. You dropped it at the train stop.
I looked down, and it was true. That was my wallet. I could see it still had money in it. Was this the reason the man was behind me? Oh, thank you very much. Once I reached out to grab my wallet, the man jumped out and grabbed my arm. With the other hand, he pulled off the sheet and stuck his face to mine. It was horrible. His face was totally deformed. This man was not only homeless, but he had suffered a terrible fire that had taken his face. It was the only possible explanation. Suddenly, the man put a hand on my side so that I couldn't escape. With the other hand, he grabbed me by the neck and pressed me even more against the wall. Once he was satisfied, he threw me to the side. My only impulse was to run and run in any direction of my house, crying and disgusted by what had just happened. As I ran, I could see the man standing in the same position. He didn't try to chase me. He just stood there, laughing and looking at me. That was the last time I was reckless enough to go back alone at night. And the next day, I asked for a shift change at my job. No more night shift. I still can't explain what happened that night, but on reflection, there really isn't much of an explanation. I was just the victim of a perverse and sadistic man who saw prey in the night. I still remember him laughing in the distance, being satisfied with the fear he caused me. And I wonder what would have happened if he had wanted to do more than just scare me, and how helpless I would have been in front of him.
The party was pretty wild. Even as I left the club, I kept tapping my feet to the beat of the music playing. I was giddy. Though the club was in a rather unsavory part of town, I tried not to think about it too much. With the cool night air sobering me up fairly quickly, I became aware of my surroundings. But there was nothing to worry about. Nothing could happen on such a good night, right?
Hey, kiddo.
Huh? I stopped in my tracks at the voice coming from my right. I wanted to just walk on, but I couldn't. After all, the stranger sounded kind. Hello?
Sorry for giving you a fright.
I'd later come to know the man as Toby. He was an interesting fellow. Clearly a lot less fortunate than I was. Based on his old ragged clothes and odd smell, it was fairly easy for me to realize that. But, well, I wasn't the one to judge.
I'm sorry, kid, but I'm really hungry. Could you buy me a burger from that place down the street? It'll only cost you a few bucks, and you'll make this very old man very happy.
He wasn't that old, but that didn't make his plea any less significant. Clearly, he's seen better days. And, well, I had some cash left. You know, I'm hungry myself, actually. So why not? Want to come inside with me? It's surely nicer than...
No.
He said that really quickly, his voice loud and sharp. I took a step back, my head pressing against the old brick wall behind me for a second. For a second, I felt cornered.
Sorry. They don't like my kind in there. Apparently, I scared off their customers or whatever.
Oh. I took a deep breath, forcing my lips to curl into a smile. Well, that did make sense. That's all right. I'll just grab something for us and we can share them.
We can have them on the riverbank. It's pretty cool this time of year.
Aren't you cold, though? He didn't answer, just shrugged. I guess he was just used to it. It took me a few minutes, but I made it to the local burger joint relatively quickly. It was pretty empty for the most part, save for a few other night owls who seemed to be quite a bit drunker than I was. As I lined up to get our order, I noticed that the server was looking at me oddly. However, she still gave me my food with a big smile. Maybe she was used to being hit on by oddballs late at night? Here you go, man. Wait, I forgot to ask your...
I'm Toby.
That was all he said as he took his burger before flashing me a near toothless grin.
Anyway, come. It's better for us to sit down somewhere than to eat standing up. We're not horses, are we, Marcus?
That was a bit odd, but I shrugged it off. It was clear that Toby had a bit of an odd sense of humor. I didn't mind it. I prefer to see people smile than frown after all. Still, just as I took the first bite of my burger, he spoke up, his eyes never leaving my face. That was a bit creepy, I admit.
You got any extra cash? I could really use some.
I didn't. I mean, I had my card, but most ATMs in the area were locked off by now, mostly due to the sketchy people wandering around at night. And as much as I was okay to give some food to a random person I didn't know, I was not okay with fueling whatever addiction he had. Sorry, not really, no.
Really? I saw your card when you were paying for the burgers.
Okay. What? Look, man, I'm a broke student. I was happy to get you some grub, but I can't afford to give you money.
Are you sure? Just a few bucks would make a huge difference to me.
Sorry, but I can't. I stood up. Suddenly, the pleasant company I'd had turned sour, and I didn't feel comfortable anymore. I need to go home. I have a math exam tomorrow.
Do you?
Yeah, I do.
But tomorrow is a Sunday. Isn't that why you went out tonight?
He was getting weird. I was unable to pinpoint just why, but it felt like he knew far too much about me. And well, I didn't like that at all. Maybe, but I still need to go.
Stay.
The way he grabbed my wrist hurt. Despite how frail he was, he had a strong grip. Still, it was fairly easy to push him away. I started walking away, but quickly picked up my pace. Maybe I was wrong, but there was something sinister about Toby that made me want to leave as far as I could.
Okay. I get the hint, kid. Go.
He sounded defeated. I wanted to stop somehow, to tell him that it wasn't him, that I was just paranoid. But I didn't. Despite the fact that he didn't move from the riverbank as I left, my fingers lingered on the emergency button on my phone as I went, just in case. I got to my street reasonably quickly. After all, I live near the bad parts of town. Jeez, just what the heck was that? As I stumbled to find my keys, I heard it. Footsteps. I thought maybe someone else was out at this time. Still, something just felt off. Suddenly I felt as if the fresh, cool air had gotten stiffer. I felt almost suffocated. When I turned around to check the source of the noise, I almost screamed. It was Toby, standing only a few meters away from me with a baseball bat in his hands.
I really only wanted some cash, kid. I don't want to hurt you, but I've got payments that are due. Can't you help an old man out?
Toby, I'm gonna call the cops. He was much faster than I thought he'd be. I blinked and suddenly he was standing in front of me, grinning. His toothless smile made me shudder. There was something uncanny about the way he was staring at me. Maybe I should have given him the money, but I didn't want to. It just didn't feel right. Please, leave me be. I don't have anything to give you anyway.
I know you have money, kid. I know a lot more about you than you like. I've been watching you after all.
He was trying to get into my head. Or maybe he was telling the truth. I wasn't sure. But what I did know was that I should not have turned my back on him as I made my dash into my apartment building. I woke up on the floor a few hours later, shaking from the cold. Toby was nowhere to be seen. The same could be said for all of my belongings. Still, even now, months later, I have nightmares of him watching me, Maybe I should have been kinder to him. Maybe then I wouldn't feel like he's constantly after me, ready to strike the second I put my guard down. Maybe.
Homelessness, the living nightmare itself. What could be worse than starvation? Night after night, feeling the stomach eat away at itself as the elements thrash at your exposed flesh through the tattered sleeping bag. People are worse. Some give you dirty looks in the streets, as if you're some subhuman nuisance to their day. Some are somewhat nice and give you what spare cash they have on hand, if it's convenient for them. But one of them, or what I can only assume to be a person, homeless too perhaps, he wanted my flesh. Even 10 years on, now living in a comfortable flat with a wife and 2 kids, I truly have emerged from the lowest point of my life. Yet, the memory of that it stuck. During my 20s, back when I was still somewhat fresh at uni, I had a problem of sorts. Drugs. I couldn't live without them. Night after night, I spent my time deep in the powdered lines and packets, unable to escape my own desire. It wasn't long before the uni found out, expelling me for it. I tried going to my parents for help after that, but they were done with me too. Out on the streets, no degree to my name, I was homeless. I roamed for about 3 years since then, from town to town, always searching for a busy central area to make some petty cash. At the same time, I was still recovering from the horrors of drug abuse that tortured my every waking thought. Every penny I made, I used on buses for the next town, sometimes food, and on the very rare occasion, a warm shower. That was until I came across a town from the earliest parts of my childhood, back when things were simpler, before the drugs. There was this spot that my dad and I always used to go for adventures in. From what I recalled, it was a little clearing behind a couple rows of bushes that sat neatly beside the town's river. Remembering the spot, I decided it would be a perfect area to sleep for the night, at least from the elements. It was warming to see that it was still there. The shrubs surrounding it had grown tall with age, and the tree covering it stood almost as tall as the bridge hanging above it. How time had passed us all. It had been a long bus ride, and the sun was dipping beneath the horizon. I had just enough time to trek along the riverbank up to the little gap in the bushes where my father and I used to enter from. I first pushed my backpack through to break away at some of the twigs that had grown inwards over time. Yet, as I pushed it through, I was met with a little resistance. Had this part of the bush not grown since? I had thought. Feeling my backpack fall through the other side, I decided it was my turn. Feeling utterly exhausted, I forced my body through until I clattered out the other end. I fell to the dirt with a hard smack. Once I had stabilized myself, I peered up, excited to feel the flood of memories come rushing in. The place was a dump. There were large heaps of rubbish lying everywhere. Tattered sleeping bags strewn across the mud, used syringes stuck out of the ground, some lay on empty cans, and in the center, a foul, rancid smell arose. There was a pile of meat in the middle. At the time, I guessed it must have been a hotspot for the homeless, perhaps even teenagers looking for a drunken adventure. It was heartbreaking to see my once-beloved spot being used with such a lack of respect, but what position was I in to be judgmental? I sucked it up and found a relatively clean spot over in the corner, furthest away from the entrance. As I climbed into my rotting sleeping bag, I felt the childhood memories seeping in. One by one, I drifted to bed, tears gushing from my crumbling eyes. What must have been hours later, I woke up to the sound of leaves rustling from the other side of the pile of trash and flesh. As my eyes flickered open, I was made immediately aware of the source of the rustling. A dark figure stood in the entrance. It was far too dark to make out any details, but I was able to see that the figure was holding a sleeping bag loosely in one hand. I took it he was homeless too, yet, for some reason, he just stood there. The bushes blocked out the noise of the wind, so all I could hear was his breathing, thick and heavy. It didn't feel too threatening at the time, but I remained silent. I had no idea what the figure was capable of, or what he would do if he moved. Step by step, he wandered over to the pile of meat in the middle. Upon reaching it, he dropped down to his knees and stuck his face straight into it, gorging on its contents. The sight of it was putrid. He guzzled, gobbled, slathered, and ripped at the spoiled meat, green and grotesque. Was he really that starved? "Hey!" I shouted. I felt I had alerted him of my presence. My mouth moved on its own. "What are you doing, man? That stuff looks like it's been there for..." His head flicked around to face me. He stared at me, blood still dripping from his teeth. He started to smile. Suddenly, a mouthful of sharpened teeth revealed themselves to me, along with his nails, roughly sharpened. In an instant, he charged. As he bounded towards me on all fours, I flung the sleeping bag from my legs and threw my body into the bushes behind me. My eyes bulged as I hurled myself through the sharp sticks and vicious prods as I crawled towards survival. The sound of teeth clamping down behind me sent streaks of terror straight up my spine as I felt his presence following me closely behind. The instant I emerged from the shrubbery, I bolted away, leaving all the contents of my backpack behind, with that thing. Once at a distance, I checked behind myself for the man. Only a head was poking out from the bushes, staring at me, drooling with hunger. That day, I forced my life to change to avoid ever being back on the streets again. The following day, I called the police, explaining to them the state of the clearing and the cannibal living there. But being the homeless man I was, they didn't believe me. Upon arrival, it seemed all the meat I had mentioned had previously been fed on had been taken. Only the wreck of the homeless camp remained. That's what they called it. But I knew, and still know it's real. The homeless meat grinder.